Okay, we are making a picture of some fall leaves today, and we are actually going to use our hands as the tracers for this design. And you're going to start with pencil first. I use permanent markers for my video because that shows up better. So we're going to write our names at the bottom. And then we're going to trace our hands. So I'm going to put my hand down on my paper, and then I want to separate these two fingers and my thumb to give me a guide for my first leaf. So I'm going to go around this, and I'm not going to go all the way in. Go around the other two fingers, and again, I'm not going to go all the way in. Come around my thumb and back down. So then I'm going to connect this as a curve. And then I am going to make a line down the center. And that's going to come out to connect to my stem too. So I'm going to make this just a little bit thicker. And then I'm going to go up from there, and we're going to make a few lines coming out to the sides for the veins of the leaf, and I'm making those a little bit thicker. I'm going to go a little bit higher up, and I'm going to make these next lines go out and then I'm going to go up a little higher on my leaf and make these lines going up. So these are the veins of my leaf, and then off of these veins I'm going to make some smaller veins. So it's almost like making the branches of a tree. You have your big branches, and then you have your smaller branches. And I'm sort of angling them towards the edges of my leaf. Away from the center line and out towards the points of my leaf. These are like 3 points of this leaf. All right, then my other leaf, I'm going to keep my fingers together, and I'm just sort of angling it in. And I don't have to stay real close to my hand if I don't want to. I'm actually going to skip over the thumb, I think. Maybe just tuck it in. And then I'm going to connect this leaf at the bottom by curving it off. And it really doesn't matter what kind of shape you end up with. It's just sort of a guide to give us a nice big shape. It doesn't have to be perfectly even. And then we're going to make the line down the middle like I just did, and then some other lines curving off of that. And then again, smaller lines coming off of those, like branches of a tree. And then I did one more little bit of a leaf, sort of peeking off the bottom of my paper. 3 is usually a nice number for a composition to add interest. 2 is usually a little bit too even. 3 is usually nice to add a little bit of variety. Different kind of balance. Okay, so after I've drawn that in pencil, then I'm going to take my oil pastels and outline. These are sometimes also called crayons. If you don't have these, you can always just use crayons. So I'm going to carefully cover up my pencil lines. So the oil pastels are kind of like crayons. They just make a little bit thicker line, a little bit darker without having to press so hard. And maybe they have a little bit more oil in them because their wax resist does usually turn out a little bit brighter than the wax resist you get from a crayon. But if crayons are all you have, then crayons are fine to use too. Done this project many times, or something similar, with crayons. And then even watercolor paints are nice too, if you don't have tempera cake paints or regular tempera later on. Okay, so you can switch colors. You can use any colors you really want for outlining. And we have an artist for inspiration that I like to use for this project is Paul Cezanne. He was an impressionist painter, or more likely a post-impressionist painter, because his artwork was a little bit more solid and flatter looking than the impressionist painters. He didn't worry about having a lot of distance or depth to his artwork. So his artwork often looked flatter than the impressionist painters. So he was painting his impression of what he saw. He wasn't painting it exactly like real life. So he would change the colors, make them not exactly how they were in real life, and use the warm colors and the cool colors like impressionist painters did. So warm colors are red, orange, yellow, and then cool colors are generally green, blue, and purple. So I'm using my cool colors actually to outline my leaves, and then I'm going to use cool colors for my background, and then warm colors for inside my leaves when I paint them. So my next step is to use some paints. On my example, I used the liquid tempera paints, and I didn't have a purple or orange, so I had to use that in the tempera cakes instead. So I'm going to clean out my brush, and remember, I want to move it along the inside of my cup. None of that tapping noise, because that splashes the water and the paint where we don't want it to go. We want to have control over our paints. So I used yellow first, and I just dip it a little bit in my paint. I don't sink it all the way in there. And I just want to get the end of the brush with the paint, not the whole paintbrush full of paint. Just the brush part at the very end with my liquid tempera. I don't want to get too much on there where it's falling and dripping all over my paper, where I don't want it to go. And if I'm putting paint way down here on my ferrule of my brush, it's just going to get wasted. So we want to control where our paint goes the best we can, and those are some tips and tricks for painting with liquid tempera. So I like to do a little bit on each leaf for each one of the warm colors. Okay, and then I'm going to clean off my brush really well. And then again, move along the inside of my cup. And then I'm going to get some orange from my tempera cake paints. And you can see that the crayon or oil pastel lines still show up nicely because the wax does not want to mix with the water from the paints. Wax resist. And if your paints overlap a little bit with each other, it's not a big deal because these three colors, red, orange, and yellow, are next to each other on the color wheel, and they blend nicely together. You might find if your paint is real thick that it does cover up some of your oil pastel lines or crayon lines. So you may have to add a little bit more water in your brush and sort of spread it out gently. Or you could wait till it dries and then go back over your oil pastel line later, or your crayon line later. So I'm getting some red from my liquid tempera, and now this is a washable tempera. Most tempera actually is washable, but this one also says washable on the label. So the washables tend to come out a little bit lighter, a little bit more watery looking, and not quite as dark as a regular tempera. So, and this one does kind of have sort of a pinkish red to it, which is fine. Okay, and then after that, we're going to work on our background. So our artist Paul Cezanne was born in France in 1839, and he died in 1906. And one of his famous paintings, or several of his famous paintings, were of a mountain called Saint Victoire. So that's often what I use for inspiration from this artist, Mount Saint Victoire. And then from different, he often does this mountain painting from different views. So Paul Cezanne painted a lot of landscapes and also still lifes and portraits, and in his own style that was just a bit different from the Impressionists. A little bit more solid and flatter looking. I'm just using my cool colors now for my background. And again, I didn't have purple in my liquid tempera, so instead I'm using it from my tempera cake sets, which are a lot like watercolors. And then I did have some green in my liquid tempera. And remember, you want to use your brush real gently. You don't want to smush down and twist and pull and push, okay? You want to keep those bristles on the paintbrush nice and straight. So working gently, not smushing my brush. I'm just letting it touch the surface gently of my paper. And also, if I hold my brush lower, that often helps to control my brush better. And then just watch out where you're doing your name, because you want to make sure it's still showing up. This green is kind of light, so I think it would be fine to paint over. As long as I don't go real dark with my paint. All right, and good luck with your art. I hope it turns out just beautifully for you.